Tape emulation plugins have become a staple for not only lo-fi producers, but really for every genre out there. Whether you're looking to add warmth to instruments or punch to drums via tape saturation, or whether you're looking to add the imperfections of old mediums to tracks such as wow and flutter, or dropouts, or tape noise, then really there's so many plugins to choose from at the moment. It's a great time to be a producer, but there's also so much choice it can be hard to narrow down which is actually right for you. So firstly, in this video I'm going to break down some of the common features of tape emulation VSTs, reel-to-reel or cassette emulation VSTs, so that way you'll know what everything does on all of these VSTs I'm going to break down. And then secondly, I'll go over 8 of my favourite tape emulation VSTs, and I'll break down exactly what I use them for, because a lot of them have got different applications. But firstly, I'm just going to go over the background of the tape emulation plugins and what some of the features of these are. So generally, when we're talking about tape emulation plugins, there's 2 different types that really spring to mind. So you've got the reel-to-reel emulators and you've got the cassette tape emulators. And there is crossover between the two when it comes to VSTs. But really a reel-to-reel would be a higher quality, high fidelity audio recording on a reel, and cassette tapes would be geared towards more sort of home recording budget equipment, and they'd have a lesser sound quality, which can sometimes be desirable in this case. And also, as I break down some of the VSTs, there's going to be a few effects that I talk about. One that's going to be prominent on most of these, if not all of them, is saturation. And saturation is sort of a blend of compression and adding harmonic characters to a sound. So it can be used from a really subtle way to just add a little bit of character, or to add a little bit of warmth to a track, or it can be used as a sort of more heavy distortion depending on what you're going for. So that's going to be present on pretty much all of the VSTs that I'm going to talk about. Next is a staple effect of lo-fi, and that is wow and flutter. This can be used as a very subtle or a very extreme effect, and they're both more or less the same thing. They're emulating the imperfections of cassette players and record players when they're not perfectly keeping time as they play audio back. It can sort of slow down momentarily or speed up momentarily as things slip and slide, which can cause effects where little elements of the track are sped up, slowed down, the pitch changes, and it gives you quite a unusual but also often desirable sound. So yeah, it's a really great effect that is present, I think, on most of these VSTs as well. Most of these plugins can also add tape noise to tracks, which is just a sort of white noise that will fill in the gaps of the digital tracks that you're making as if they were analog tracks recorded on tape. And finally, it's probably worth mentioning a few of these are modeled on actual equipment, so they'll have different settings that may not necessarily be intuitive for VSTs. But what there is things like changing the playback speed of the tape, which was often a feature. So if you increase the speed of the playback, you'll increase the speed of some of the effects like wow and flutter. And there's also on most of these options to change the tape if it's emulating an actual cassette. So for example, with the J37, which is based on the J37 reel-to-reel recorder, you can change the formula, which is changing the type of tape that it's using. So yeah, there are little intricacies like that, which I'll try and explain as I go through the video. But yeah, I just want to briefly cover those things before I started. So now I'm just going to break down my 8 favorite tape emulation plugins and what I use them for. So this is my top 8 picks for the tape VSTs. They're in no particular order, and it's probably going to be better if you can listen on a good set of headphones or good set of monitors. And the sounds that I'm going to be using are all going to be from my Dreamy Lo-Fi Hip Hop Volume 2 sample pack, just to demonstrate the effects. So I'll link that as well as all of the VSTs in the description down below. So I'm going to kick off with the number 1 spot, which is one that I've used quite a lot. So if you watch this channel, you've probably seen it before. And that is the J37 stereo, modeled on the piece of kit from, I think, the 50s. So this is one of the more subtle ones, I'd say, or at least I use it in a more subtle way. So this is the interface. All the interfaces on these VSTs do look pretty great. This might be a little bit intimidating as it's got a few things on there that aren't necessarily completely obvious as what they do. So changing the formula, for example, would change the reel, which changes the animation up there. You can change the playback speed of the reel. You've got your wow and your flutter, your noise level, as well as saturation, your VU meters, and some delay features as well. So I usually use this on things like piano and guitar to add a little bit of top end saturation and harmonics. So this is the initial demo. You can't really hear much of a difference when you turn it on from its bass preset. If I move that to 0, you can actually link the in and the out gain. So if I increase the gain going in, it compensates it by reducing it going out. So there you can hear more heavy saturation as I go heavy on that. So I'll bring that down to around 0. So you can add a little bit of crispness and saturation, a little bit of background noise, and then start adding in some wow and flutter, increasing the depth dB. The 888 is more of a lo-fi tape, so I'll go for that, and I'll lower the speed. makes the wow and the flutter a little bit more prominent and obvious. So this is it with, and this is it without. So especially on the lead guitar there, just gives it a bit of a nice little subtle lo-fi feel. And often they've got some great presets. I usually go straight for the piano stereo, which just adds a bit of saturation to the top end of pianos, makes them a little bit brighter and a little bit more interesting. So yeah, that's one that I would highly recommend. I think you can pick up the Waves stuff quite cheap. There's another Waves plugin that I'll talk about now. But yeah, generally Waves have got all sorts of sales on as the year goes through, so definitely keep an eye out for that. The second one is one that I've only recently picked up, and it's the Crammer tape. So this is the Crammer tape. It's, I guess, similar. It's a reel-to-reel model, and it's got some of the similar effects to the J37. So if I press play there, you can change the flux, which is like the saturation. It's got your wow and your flutter. Your noise level, which you can adjust there. And one thing I really like about this is the little feedback option, which is something I've used a few times. It's great for transitioning or adding a little bit of a sort of jittery sound to things. So this is what it sounds like. So it's a nice effect just to add to instruments to keep them interesting as you go through the track. And it can be great for adding a bit of chaos as you build up to transition. So yeah, I really like that. That's probably the main reason I get it over the J37, but generally my go-to is the J37 for the wave stuff. But yeah, another nice one I thought it worth mentioning, so that's number 2. Next on to number 3, which is the Sketch Cassette 2. This is one that you've probably heard of if you're a lo-fi producer. It's one that I use quite a lot at the moment, and this one is less of a sort of subtle brightener and more of a heavy cassette effect. So if I play this demo, so this is the demo, and you can hear straight away if I turn it on, it gets a little bit more sort of muffled, cuts away some of the high end, and already gives it a bit of character. It's got a really cool interface to Sketch Cassette, as you can see. You've got this age of the tape, so you can make it more worn, cut it off more of the highs, making it more muffled. You can increase the input into the tape and reduce the output there. Put a little bit closer. You can change the different types of tape, so you can go for more of a cheap lo-fi tape, or stick to something a little bit more hi-fi. You can control the hiss or the white noise there, add some saturation. I really like the saturation. It's quite a subtle one, but it adds a nice warmth and character. If you click to the B, it's a little bit more extreme as well. Another really cool feature of this one is the dropouts, which isn't on any of the other ones I've mentioned. So this is what the dropout is in a dramatic form. It's cutting away some of the audio. But if you use it more subtly, you can add a little bit of nice variation, and then you've got things like delays on there as well. And mixed with this, you sort of start to get more of an interesting variation to the sound. You can make it more of a stereo width thing as well. It's got some great wow and flutter. Make it more dramatic. You can change the waveform of each. And then you've got a nice compressor there. Control the mix and the compression here. And yeah, this is one that I use a lot on if I want to make something a little bit more muffled. Maybe the drum's a little bit too harsh. I can throw this on. It's great for the intense wow and flutter effects. I just think it sounds really nice coming straight from this. So on piano and guitar, it sounds great. This is one that did actually feature quite a lot on my sample pack that I did last. So yeah, really great one. It's got some nice presets as well. But honestly, it's such an intuitive interface that it's really easy to just change it yourself and work with it that way. So yeah, that's Sketch Cassette. On to number 4, which is a new addition for me. It's the Cassette by Waves Factory. I really like the Wave Factory stuff. They're definitely underrated in my opinion. They've got some nice instruments and some really nice effects. So if I just switch it on, you can hear it working straight away. I'll get rid of the static. I don't like to use it on this one. What I like about this is you've got some nice stereo field enhancements with this. You can add your artifacts here. Again, input and output control. Go from a sort of professional sounding tape to the home studio to the lo-fi tape, which cuts away a lot of the frequencies. And obviously you've got your noise here, your stability, which is like your wow and flutter, your spread, so the stereo image of the effects, and your erasures there. So what I like to do with this is go on some of the presets. It's got a really nice chorus preset. Again, get rid of the noise. Sounds amazing on guitar. And it's got a really nice stereo image. You can go for like a completely crushed, bit crushed effect. Or like a warm pad, which is one that I use quite a bit as well. Just a little bit of wow and flutter and stereo warmth. So yeah, this is one that I picked up recently, so I'm still sort of exploring it, I guess. I'm using it on different things to see what clicks, but I love it again on piano and guitar, especially guitar with the chorus sort of effects that it gives. It's a really nice sounding plugin. So yeah, another one I would highly recommend. That is the Waves Factory cassette. So on to number 5, which is more of a staple when it comes to the mixing and mastering side of things, and that is the Ozone 9 vintage tape. So this is one that came as part of the Ozone mastering bundle. So if I play the demo here, if I turn it on, this one is the added articulation. So again, it's some harmonic character throughout the track, but in a more subtle way. So it's not always really easy to hear, but it is obvious it's there when you start to use it on different mixing elements and add it onto the master. So the thing I like about this is you can throw it on the master and it responds really well. So it's got some great presets. If you want to increase the warmth in the mid-range, you can click on that, or you can just browse through and see what works for your track. It could be added articulation or clarity in the high end, or maybe something a little bit more heavy and noticeable. But generally when it's on the master, I want it to be super subtle and more focused around the high end. So something like increased warmth works really well, like a smooth polish. But the nice thing is you can just flip between them and see what works for your track. Sometimes if it's a heavy track, you might want to go a little bit easy on this because it is supposed to be sort of harmonics to the high end. But I thought I dropped this in because it is one that I use on every track to some extent. One of the more expensive ones, but I have to mention it in this tape section because it's one that I literally, as I said, use on every mix. So number 6 is the Door cassette from Cleveland Audio. If you've never heard of Cleveland Audio, they make some really interesting and unique sounding VSTs. They're all super intuitive, they always look great, and they've all got some really interesting effects in their range. But this is one that I purchased a while ago and haven't really used much of until I was getting ready for this video. I started trying it, and it's just a really nice sounding plugin. It's super cheap at the moment, and yeah, there's not much to say on it really. I'll just show you what it sounds like. So it's got a bit of character when you turn it on. It's not like a true bypass unless you drop the dry to wet. So this is the sort of bog standard setting. Here you've got your motor quality, which controls effectively the wow and flutter. So you can make it super poor quality, which makes the wow and flutter quite prominent. So that's a nice easy one for automation, just one dial. So if you want to use that in a mix to sort of add a bit of wow and flutter temporarily, it's a nice one to have. Then you've got the head quality, which sort of cuts away some of the low range and some of the highs, gives it a bit of a distorted sound. And again, tape quality is more like your saturation. So it gives it more drive as you reduce the tape quality there. Again, you can pick from chrome, metal or normal tape, add the noise or take it off. It's got input gain, output gain, and a dry to wet mix, which is always nice to have. So yeah, it's just a nice simple one that I thought sounded really good. Again, I'd probably use it in a similar way to Sketch Cassette 2. You probably don't need all of these in your arsenal, but if you want something simple, this is a great one to go for. So that is a Sketch Cassette by Cleveland Audio. So next on the list is one that I use predominantly on drums. It's got the usual effects of the other plugins, but I find this one, it's got some great saturation and compression, which I use as sort of a parallel compression for my drums. So it is Tape by Baby Audio. If I play a little drum loop here, you can control the mix dial so it's completely bypassed or fully going through. So if I play it now, it's a little bit much. I can add a bit of drive. Quite a lot of glue compression is already on there. I'll make it a hot input. And that's just way too much. So if I lower the presence, go back to normal and drop the mix, what I can do is now I've got this compressed and saturated version. I can just slide the mix a little bit until I'm happy with the sound without going too extreme. Generally, I wouldn't use this on kick drums, more for sort of snares and hi-hats and percussion and that sort of thing. If it's just not cutting through the mix well enough, I can make it stand out a little bit more with this. So yeah, worth mentioning, it's one that I use predominantly on drums. There are some nice presets on there as well for different stuff. But yeah, I find this one is my go-to for the drums. So yeah, good one to keep a lookout for. And finally, I just wanted to show the Elephant tape rack for Ableton, which is a free download sort of tape rack made with standard Ableton instruments. So if you're not an Ableton user, all I'm trying to show you here is that you can get a lot of these effects using stock effects in your DAW. So if I just play a little demo on this one, reduce these down. So you've got your input gain and your output gain, like many of these have, which is just using utility in Ableton, which you can do in any DAW. The color, like going from a hi-fi to a sort of lo-fi tape, just cuts away some of the lows and some of the highs in this pattern, which again you can recreate yourself. It's got a nice drive on there with the Ableton saturation. So that's just increasing the drive and reducing the output accordingly. You've got a tape hiss on there with a violin distortion and vocoder just to add this noise. The glue compressor is also in there, so it's reducing the threshold and then balancing it with the makeup. And then it's using frequency shifters here for the wow and flutter effects. So yeah, I mean, Elephant is a great producer, really good Ableton sort of guru. So I would recommend checking out his videos for that, especially if you're into like electronic and ambient stuff. But yeah, it's a free download, which I'll link in the description down below. It's one that I've used a few times. It's a really great tool to have, especially because it's just using your standard Ableton effects. But as I say, if you've not got the cash to buy a tape emulation VST at the moment, one to look out for, or if you're using a different DAW, you can try and recreate it yourself. Obviously, a lot of these plugins are great and they've got their own modeling and characteristics, which you may not be able to create easily, but a lot of the basic effects you can create. So it's great to sort of play around with it in that regard. But yeah, that is pretty much it for this week's video. Let me know in the comments down below what you think of these VSTs. Have you got any? Have you tried them out? Is there any you don't like or any that I've missed off? Would love to know. But yeah, let me know in the comments as well what you want me to focus on next. I was thinking about doing a video on some of my favourite reverbs because there's a few hidden gems that I think not many people are using. If you'd be interested in that, let me know in the comments down below. But if not, I'll catch you next week. So yeah, thanks for watching and see you in next week's video.